So I'm here in National Review Studio with Kellie-Jay Keen-Minshull, who is a mum of 4 from Wiltshire in the southwest of England. And Kellie-Jay is an activist for women's rights and child safeguarding. And she's also a figure of considerable controversy, as evidenced by her recent trip to New York. She is a cancelled woman. And I'll let you explain, Kellie-Jay, what I'm talking about.
So women such as myself who speak out and recognise biology, we are being cancelled. So from public platforms, like literally public platforms. So the New York City Library refused to hold this event. So the New York Public Library refused to hold this event, which is 5 women talking about the conflicting rights between trans rights and women's rights. And then social media platforms also ban women frequently who talk about the same rights issues.
So you would be what transgender activists would call a TERF, which is a trans exclusionary radical feminist. You're someone who is not on the right, but in many ways is worse than somebody who's on the right, because you're somebody who is approaching this from within left liberal ranks, which is ultimately more threatening, I think. Could you just explain, what is it you believe? What is it that gets everybody so upset? Do you have any visual aids?
So I have a scarf on today. So this is a lovely velvet with silver decorated scarf. And then that's not transphobic. And that's transphobic. So it says the dictionary definition of woman. So it's funny that you use the word belief, because I sort of have an issue with that. It's not a belief. It's it's fact-based. Belief sort of conjures up the idea that it cannot be believed, but that is just ridiculous.
Right, so this is a table.
Yeah.
That's not...
I don't believe
it's not a philosophical belief that that's the table.
Yeah.
It just is a table.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not even a worldview for you. It's just common sense.
Yeah. It's just what's right. And what that truthful statement that men cannot be women and you cannot be born in the wrong body and biology is very important and cannot be changed. Those things, what pivots on all of those things is really important stuff when it comes to the safeguarding of children, organisation of safe spaces and sex-segregated spaces, which work for both sexes. So once you decide that it is a belief, that it's a belief that people can't change sex, or it's a belief that if you're born with a certain set of genitals that you are whatever biological sex that we recognise those genitals actually show, then just the whole thing falls apart. The whole of society is just, I think, falls apart.
I think it's actually worth pointing out that a lot of your activism and your campaigning is very based on this idea of a common sense, simple statement of fact. So in some ways, I think you're kind of a genius at marketing, because the dictionary definition, you had a campaign, a billboard campaign, where you got that put up in, where was it, Leeds? Or
it was in Liverpool to coincide with the Labour Party conference.
Okay, so it was just a simple black and white, if you just like show, simple black and white, woman.
And then the phonetic woman.
Phonetic woman, noun, adult, human, female.
Yeah.
And then this caused such massive offence that there was this backlash. You went on Sky News against this activist and you were defending the dictionary definition of woman. And it's a similar thing with like the cancelled women. So the event that was supposed to be held at New York Public Library was literally called Cancelled Women. And it was a panelist of people who had been cancelled from various other events because of this belief. And then it was cancelled. Did you do that partly because you thought it was likely that it would be cancelled and it kind of proves your point for you?
Well, I would have if it was my event. I think it's a genius idea. I'm wondering if in the New York Library they actually have any dictionaries, because I fear for their clientele. that they will find the definition of woman in the dictionary, and I think that, you know, literally could cause great distress to many people.
But it is actually amazing, though, that I might be putting words in your mouth, but I can't imagine you thought of yourself as somebody who would be coming out to New York to give a speech or being quoted in Douglas Murray's The Madness of Crowds, or, you know, having hit pieces in the New York Times written about you, or, you know, National Review, The Spectator, Sky News, Times of London, all for saying something that I think most people would probably think not just to be uncontroversial, but as you said, not even a belief, not even particularly interesting.
I think, like 20 years ago, I would have been the woman that talks too much in a queue in a shop. That's who I am. I'm the person that tells somebody far too much information about themselves at a bus stop when the person probably doesn't even want a conversation. I'm that woman. I just talk too much. And I say things that I think I should be able to say. And in fact, the more I feel that I can't say something, the more I want to say it everywhere I go. And because I'm that woman who just says things that I think, I've become somewhat of a novelty, or I've become, you know, someone of note, because it's so unusual that people just speak the truth.
And so how did you originally get involved in this then? I can't imagine you anticipated the amount of attention you'd get. So how did this come about?
So in 2015, when the Tory party were elected in the UK, and I was very much on the left then, I joined this online group, and it was something like Awesome Lefty Women or Amazing Lefty Women. And that was the first time I sort of noticed that a women-only space was being invaded by lots of men that called themselves women. And I was sort of trying to get my head around how that was happening, and I didn't sort of believe it. I thought people were sort of doing it out of politeness, but I didn't know that it was as it is, which is if you don't say it, then you are absolutely vilified. And this chap came on, and I could hear him in a northern comic voice. So in the UK, like a 1970s northern comic would be a really sexist mother-in-law joke type comic. And he told a joke about someone tied to a radiator, like the punchline was a woman after being beaten tied to a radiator, you know, some sort of joke that not many women tell or find particularly funny. And I just said to him, are you sure you identify as a woman? And that question basically just got me days of abuse, that I was a TERF, I was a bigot, I was a transphobe, I was disgusting, and all these things just for saying to a man, are you sure you identify as a woman? So that's it. That's my journey into it.
So my experience is similar to yours in the sense that I could never have anticipated I would spend the amount of time that I have spent looking up different types of fetish porn, trans porn, in a professional capacity, I hasten to add, or you know, like be going on the BBC to explain that actually the sex is binary and it's mutable, and getting all these kind of death threats and abuse that I just think a lot of people do not have the level of information and insight into this issue that we do from the time we've spent. A lot of people think this is some fringe issue. Yes, it's crazy. Yes, it's a fad. What's the big deal? Do you not have better things to do with your time? Do I not have better things to do with my time? Why do you care about this so much?
I just think so much rides on it. So I got kicked out of loads of online lefty groups for asking this question. Does my 11-year-old daughter have the right to use a female-only space without seeing an adult penis? So, like changing rooms and toilets and whatever. And that question, people are like, you're disgusting, you're raising your daughter to stare at people's genitals. And, so it affects so many areas of our lives, which from, you know, in schools in the UK now, a 4-year-old child has been asked, are you a boy, are you a girl, are you trans? I mean, this level of societal coercion and brainwashing is something I don't think I've ever seen in my lifetime, and I'm not sure has happened in the UK in this sort of forced way, because every other social change has come about through years of struggle and convincing everybody to come along with it. But this isn't that way at all.
I don't know if you have this. Like, I sometimes find that there's so many problems that come from this ideology that when someone's like, why do you care about that so much? I almost don't know where to begin. I start with the kids. So I did a big expose for National Review based on the little kid in Texas whose parents were fighting over whether he's a girl or a boy, but to talk about a much larger problem in the US, which is that we don't even know how many children are having their sexual development permanently altered, interfered with in truly devastating ways. So boys as young as 15 have had their penis removed in the United States. Girls as young as 13, their breasts removed. There's one clinic in Los Angeles that they've personally referred 200 girls. That's just one clinic, and there's at least 40, probably over 60 clinics.
Yeah.
So when you start to do up match up the numbers, you're like, oh my goodness. Then there's the fact, as you say, you go into schools. Where are they getting this idea they're in the wrong body? It starts in schools. It starts in communities. It starts with lots of people who, for reasons of politeness or ignorance, are scared to say, wait a minute, hang on, this actually does have consequences. Yeah. Then there's the women's rights angle. And the fact that, as you say, there's like women's sports is now a joke, right?
Yeah.
Did you see the South Park episode? Like, it's just, right? It's a joke. We're being laughed at. And then there's gay rights as well. I mean, the big concern about the clinic in London is that how many of these little kids are actually gay. Yeah. And you see an effeminate little boy and you think, do you know what? We'd rather not have him growing up to be an adult homosexual, so we'll just turn him into a girl. Woo! Yeah. There you go. There's your conversion therapy. The list goes on and on and on and on and on. And it's really difficult because in the United States, and this is one of the reasons I'm glad you're here, it's so difficult to make any sort of impression on anyone because everything is left or right. Yeah. You are no longer on the left. You have exiled yourself by wearing that T-shirt, by wearing that scarf, by talking to me. You've exiled yourself. How is it different in the UK being able to fight back against this idea that this is some conservative, arch-conservative conspiracy akin to people who wanted to take away gay rights? How do you personally fight back against that?
Well, I think the biggest voices initially against it were on the left. And we do have women's organisations that absolutely refuse to cooperate with the right. So they can still say, and I guess it does lend itself to the whole movement, they can say this is from the left. Plus, it's a lot of lesbians that do have a voice in the UK that are speaking out. So they're usually on the left. I mean, I'm not going to sort of say that every lesbian is left-wing, but those groups are often on the left. And we're just so much smaller. You know, I can go and see my MP, whose boss is the Prime Minister, and I can see my MP by right of the fact that I'm a constituent. So we do have much easier access to power. I think people do in the US as well. You can just go and knock on a door of a representative, can't you, and pitch someone for 2 minutes. But you've got to fly from wherever to come and do that in Washington. I don't know how accessible their politicians are, and your politics is swimming in money, unlike ours, where, you know, things aren't so lobbied. Although, I mean, they are. They're insane. I went to the Conservative Party women's. I joined this Conservative Party women's group, and I joined it because I wanted access to these women, because I thought they're not going to believe this nonsense. You know, they probably still make ham sandwiches and go hunting on a Sunday morning. You know, they're going to be wearing tweed. They're not going to believe this nonsense. And I went and I asked Maria Miller, who was the chair of the Women and Equalities Committee, what is a woman? And she sort of did oh, let's talk about that later. I was like, no, can you, what is a woman? But they won't say. And then another lady came over and she's very stuff and she was like, well, I want you to know that I fully support trans women. And I said, oh, okay, all right, I fully support women. And she said, but I really need you to know that I support trans women. And I said, well, that's fantastic. I'm glad you like men. but I support women and children.
Okay, this is actually this is a serious point worth making. I find it baffling, genuinely baffling, that when I say that a trans woman is a man, that's an insult. Because I don't think there's anything wrong with being a man at all.
Yeah.
So when someone's like, oh, how dare you say trans women are men? It's like, but since when was being a man an insult? Now, obviously, judging from the way this person is presenting themselves, they don't feel the same way. They obviously are not comfortable being a man, and fair enough, whatever. But there is a point whereby it is unreasonably coercive to expect me to forfeit my, as you say, not even belief, but awareness of the fact that you're a man. And it's they just play the offence card again and again and again. It's like, I mean, you've had this before. You've been on television where the presenter has gone, and do you accept that she is a woman? And they're pointing at a man.
Yes.
And you're forced to say, well, no, actually. And then the whole thing turns into this.
But that presenter didn't say what he said. He said, India sees herself as a woman. At no point did that presenter say, I see India as a woman. I think it's somebody did a video on the thing and brought it up, and I thought it was a very interesting point. At no point did Eamon Holmes on This Morning say that he believed for a second that India Willoughby was actually a woman.
India Willoughby was Jonathan Willoughby until what?
Well, until he realised that he probably wasn't going to have a great career. and then he, I mean, to be fair, his career is much more interesting since he transitioned. Yeah.
He also gets away with a lot more, I can say from personal experience. But anyway, we won't go into that. Okay, so the other point I wanted to raise about this like culture war in the US is that I find here everything is overly ideological. So the whole fact that this is pretty common sense and scientific doesn't really matter because it's not so much what you're saying, it's who's saying it. Yeah. So you had some 1 degree association with the Heritage Foundation, which was obviously overplayed and overwrought by the usual suspects. But the fact that this is a conservative think tank that is against abortion, that is used to discredit everything you're saying, even though you've not, to my knowledge, been particularly involved in anti-abortion activism.
Well, clearly I've received millions from the foundation.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the rumour, that I receive lots of right-wing money. I think even the Heritage Foundation has put a statement out to say that they don't have any associate. I mean, I'm sure they don't want to be associated with me.
No, you're a massive liability. So just to make it clear, this actually came about because about this time last year, Kellie-Jay, Julia Long and Venice Allen went to the Capitol to hand out some of their literature in the form of stickers and T-shirts and came across Sarah McBride, who is a man who is involved in the human rights campaign and decided to confront Sarah and ask him why he was advancing policies that are so damaging to women and children. And then this spectacle... well, you could take over from here.
Well, the left-wing feminists and academics in the United Kingdom decided that what I had done was harass a vulnerable person. I mean, they said trans women, but I think in the way they responded, it wouldn't have been such if they saw him as a man, a regular man.
Not just a regular man, a male lobbyist.
It's really powerful.
A male lobbyist working at the top.
Didn't he work under Obama? He was like one of Obama's...
I don't remember, but all I know is the Human Rights Campaign is next to, Donald Trump and God is like one of the most powerful institutions.
Horrific institution.
In the United States. It really does have... It touches on so many things. It gets so much money. It's got huge corporate power and influence. Yeah. And so the idea that you would confront a male lobbyist in charge of a campaign like that, and as you say, the narrative was that you had harassed a vulnerable woman.
I asked him questions for about 2.5 minutes, and I was I don't think I ever got closer than about 2 meters away from him.
You're also tiny.
I am quite small.
What height are you?
I'm 5'1".
Okay.
So I am really, really quite small. But it's just really interesting because if he had been a man, if people had seen him as a man, if he didn't have a twin set on that day, I think people would have been like, yeah, that's great. Like they did when somebody got in a lift.
Oh, an elevator.
And then they got taken to some
that was
fancy thing in America.
That was the Kavanaugh thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, exactly. Okay, let's move on then and talk a bit about feminism. I'm not a feminist. I know why I'm not a feminist. But you go first.
Well, I probably went along with the whole idea that I was a feminist, having not really read much feminism, because that seemed like the right thing to do, because I'm a woman. When I had children, I think my life changed dramatically in a way.
You have 4, right?
Yeah, I've got 4. And I stayed at home with them, and I hadn't anticipated that I would want to do that. But then I could afford to do it, and wild horses wouldn't have made me leave my children once I'd had them. The idea of handing over that small baby to someone else to look after all day was just something that I just couldn't bear. So I stayed home with them, but I realised that my life was different. So I did become secondary because I was their mum, and so I was whichever child's mother, and I was my husband's wife, and I sort of took a step back in my own life. But then when you sort of come out through it, you realise, well, of course you do, because your children are so very important that you should be secondary in your own life, especially when they're small enough to need you every minute of every day. Anyway, so then I carried on being a feminist and calling myself a feminist, rather, and then I reached this point, this activism, where I encounter lots of feminists, and I realised that feminism has now become sort of a stick to beat women with who call themselves feminists. You know, are you feminist enough? Do you agree with every single sort of aspect of feminism? And I can quite categorically say, no, I don't. I don't at all. I think that there are really good aims to women's liberation, and I'm not sure that feminism is necessarily going to achieve those.
I think for me, it's interesting because it kind of sounds like one of the reasons you're not a feminist is it doesn't, not the only reason, but one of them is that it doesn't take seriously enough the question of motherhood.
Yes.
And that has always historically been a massive problem for feminism. They don't really know what to do with it. And it's overly negative the way it's painted. It's like women bear the burden of reproduction and women are forced to do this and that. And of course, there's been lots of situations where that has been the case and it has been exploitative and that has been a source of tremendous pain and suffering for women. But it completely ignores the flip side, which is that a man will never be pregnant. A man will never have a life inside him.
Well, you say that.
See, everything comes back to this fundamental question of what is a woman, right? But in any case, your objection to it seems to be much more like your kind of lived experience, if we want to use the appropriate term. For me, it's I'm younger than you, if I'm allowed to point that out, and for me, it's actually much more something I arrived at through thinking it through, which is that what I said earlier, I just detest things that are too ideological. I think it's lazy thinking. I think that it doesn't actually have an awful lot to do with real people. It doesn't account for the complexities of life. And I find the idea that you can funnel every experience of a woman's through this lens of like the patriarchy and agency and those other buzzwords is just not only wrong but quite irritating. And you see this when it's carried to its logical conclusion. So the feminists I have a lot of time for and respect for, the feminists who really do an awful lot of good work with genuinely vulnerable women who are genuinely exploited and suffering because men have the upper hand, right? So women who've been raped, like rape crisis centres, whatever. The feminists I have less time for are the feminists who have bought into the whole ideological argument of it and love nothing more than spending a Saturday afternoon going to the Vagina Museum in London, taking lots of pictures of models of used tampons and things like that, and saying how empowering this is and how feminism needs to be so inclusive, and isn't it great that we have this massive big tampon on display. Or, Gwyneth Paltrow, I don't know whether she was joking or not, but she just released a candle product on her website that smells like her vagina, apparently.
Hers? Actually hers?
Yeah,
or just generally? It
says, this smells like my vagina. And I just...
I think it's something there is a gap in the market.
But it's sold out, Posey. I mean, Kellie-Jay. But this is the thing, right? I just look at that and I think it's just so contemptible. It's so narcissistic and so unpleasant that it just makes me think, like, these people are so irrelevant and so preachy and are really not living in the real world in any way. Nobody serious wants to talk about your bodily fluids.
Yeah, but I think also what feminism did is, as opposed to seeing women from a women-centred lens and therefore trying to make our lives important from our own perspective, they sort of saw what men were doing and decided that we should be doing that too. I don't know if you can square the circle of capitalism, needing to have money to survive, motherhood, women working and being empowered and being independent, but also raising their children, which I think actually, if you said to most women, I'll give you £1 million to stay off or £1 million to go to work, I think most would stay off. I mean, I just think most people, when they have their babies, they do actually really like them and would rather stay at home. Rather than, so we had recently had another election, and one of the parties was promising 35 hours free childcare for children before preschool. So
Labour Party.
I know it's the Liberal Democrats.
Oh,
Labour Party, I think, was 30 hours. And I was like, that's disgusting. Why not say, if you have a job and a career that depends upon you going back to work, and actually you can't really afford to take the career time out, we will provide free childcare. However, if you want to stay at home, rather than us making you go back to be a checkout operator, to pay someone else a low wage to look after your children, we'll pay you to stay home. Like, that would be valuing motherhood. But instead, it's about, we want you to get back into work as soon as humanly possible. And your children are, as long as someone's making sure they don't die, that's good enough.
Yeah, so actually this kind of is the same point in a way, that my objection is that it's too ideological and not actually engaging with things that would be genuinely helpful to the fact that there's an asymmetry between the sexes. And that is a good example of it. The other thing that annoys me is I do find a lot of modern feminism very patronising. So it removes all suggestion of personal responsibility and accountability, because as soon as you start talking about that, especially when it comes to sort of sexual encounters, you are victim blaming. But that presupposes that the woman in that situation considers herself a victim. That annoys me as well, because I do think that women should have the right to decide for themselves how they feel about something. So you will have, I remember Germaine Greer was raped and she talked about her rape and she said, I don't see myself as a victim. And people almost saw her saying that as more controversial than the rape itself. Right?
Yeah, she made some other comments about rape. I think she said something along the lines of, sometimes it's not rape, or it's not the biggest thing in the world. And I think when you get to be her age and have seen the world, and I think she's a brilliant mind, maybe what you want women to think is that if they have been a victim of sexual assault, and it is, I'm sure it's awful, harrowing, and every other negative emotion you want to throw at it. But if you tell them that less emotional labour and shame, maybe that's her message, that actually it is really, really awful, but it's not the end of the world. And so when you reflect upon your life, do you want to have spent 10 years feeling absolute horror at this terrible thing that happened to you? Or if you could have your time over, would you have wanted to sort of see yourself as less of a victim, that it's something that is absolutely terrible that happened to you, but it's not the defining moment of your life?
Right, exactly. But also giving women the freedom to decide. Everybody's different.
Yeah.
People react to things in different ways, and that's okay. So
yeah.
I feel like, if a child falls and scrapes their knee, and the child comes to you and is massively distressed, right? It's like, then you reassure them in one way. If the child comes and seems like fairly untouched by it, is like, I scraped my knee. Obviously, you treat the wound. That's the morally responsible thing to do. But you're not going to start being like, you're not distressed enough. Can you not see how big that is? React more. Like, you're not reacting to this gash on your knee in a healthy way. No, you would be like, oh, wow, what a resilient child. Good for him.
Yeah.
And you would try and respond accordingly. And this is the problem with, in my perspective, from feminism. Feminism does not seriously engage with the genuine diversity of human personality. And that is something you see time and time again. And as a result, it is very patronising. You do have the suggestion that because somebody pinched your bum 20 years ago, this has been haunting you ever since. And now you need to write a big, long essay about it in the New Yorker. Really?
Well, I think it trades on victimhood. I mean, it's gone down that road a little bit, and now it's very firmly in the kind of women can't police their own boundaries. So if somebody decides to overstep the mark, then there's nothing a woman could have possibly done to have stopped that or to asserted her boundaries early on. Now, I think there's work to be done generally in society about boundaries. I tell my children all the time, if you don't like something, you just say no. Like, not if you don't want to do your homework. But if someone stands too close to you, I constantly talk to my kids about you label it, you name it, you label it, and then you know what you're dealing with. And so if somebody's too close, you can say, you're standing too close to me. You don't have to stand there and then 10 minutes later say, oh, gosh, I was so uncomfortable. Like somebody recently was talking about a creepy person who had come onto them too many times. And I think their first encounter with that person was a little uncomfortable. Now, if that was somebody that I'd met, that would be my first and last encounter with someone that I didn't know very well, who instantly made me feel really uncomfortable, overstepped too many sort of social graces or boundaries. I would just not have that person in my life because I don't want to feel uncomfortable, but that would happen once. I wouldn't then try again and again until that person made me feel really unsafe.
And obviously it becomes very complicated and depends entirely on the circumstances, because there is a genuine problem where somebody who's somebody very superior to you in a workplace or something is using their position of power to get away with sexually harassing you. Obviously, this is a whole different ballgame. But I think what we've done is we've overgeneralised it, and we've basically said that, like you said, like you have to think of yourself first as a victim, think of yourself first as kind of powerless, and then that ends up being your default. And it's also potentially unfair to men, because I always think of the way my granny would have dealt with stuff, is she would have told somebody very clearly, then told them to get lost, then punched them in the face, then taken it further, right? And I'm not saying we should go around punching people in the face, but I think it's fair to say, you just invaded my personal space. How would you like it if I did that to you? And just being assertive in the moment. And that's a better way of teaching girls to kind of stand up for themselves, rather than being like, do you know what? Sexual encounters and the differences between the sexes are always going to be potentially clumsy and awkward, and it is really important to communicate and know what your boundaries are.
Yeah. I think at the same time, we obviously have to have conversations with everybody about respecting other people's boundaries, but it's just this... It's just this inevitability sometimes that women will be a victim at some point. And obviously, if a stranger jumps out at you, so I've had it before where I've been in a train station and somebody said some uninvited compliment, and it's shouted from the sidelines. So I'm not engaged in a conversation with that person. And it happened when I was running for a train, and then they changed the platforms, and then I came back and I just stopped and I just said to him, "What made you think I was remotely interested in your view of what I look like?" And he just looked at me and I said, "Have a really nice day." And I just went along with my day. But I've always been the person who, even as a really small person, when I was about 11, I could tell someone that they were invading my boundaries.
And that's exactly, not to bring it all back to the trans thing, but that is exactly what this is, right? This is a question of women's boundaries.
Yeah.
Absolutely, in a liberal society, liberal small l, people should be free to present themselves however they want, be as eccentric as they like, dress whatever, and actually, to a certain extent, so long as they're in sound mind, get medical procedures that they think would be helpful to them. Fine. But this is a boundaries thing. And I think it is not insignificant that it is women who are really leading the resistance to this erasure of what it means to be a woman and all the implications that has, not just for themselves but also for children, because it is just such an affront to women's boundaries to take away their right to privacy.
Yeah, I think it is directly, with intention, an assault on women. I mean, I do wake up in the middle of the night and think of this. Like, I'm afraid to fly, but that's in the moment. I'm not thinking about flying a week before I fly. I'm frightened the day that I fly. But this thing, nothing makes sense beyond the most pernicious, despicable things that I could think of as to why somebody or a group would want to obliterate children's safeguarding. And the way they do that, first of all, you dismantle feminism and women's rights, because women are the people that do look after children, and it's women then mothers, and mothers are the last sort of gatekeeping to access to children. So if they can unravel our rights and our position, then there's easier access to children. And because transing children is an actual thing where people talk about a trans child and lots of things which, if anybody genuinely just sat for 2 minutes and thought about what they meant, they would understand that it's nonsense. But I just think nothing beyond the most disgusting things actually makes sense as to the motivation of this whole movement.
I think that's probably true. I don't want to sound too conspiratorial, because I think that's probably true for some of it. But I think we're dealing with people are so prone to psychological crazes. It's unreal. When I first started looking into this, I just couldn't get over how insane it was, how fast it happened, how many people were going along with it. And then I started to look through other instances in history, and I was like, oh, we have been doing stuff like this since forever. And interestingly, and this has been pointed out by a number of people, and this is inconvenient to those who try and approach it through an ideological feminist point of view, but a lot of the people driving this are actually young women.
Yeah.
It's the new wave of feminists that are driving this. And I was reading this thing recently about the sort of 16th century witch trials. And what's so interesting was it was driven largely by young women. The victims were also women, but it was women on women. And it's this mass hysteria, this kind of group movement. And that, I think, is a huge... It's almost like we have this cultural pathology. And it's the groupthink stuff as well. So there's coupled with the fear of saying anything and fear of loss of reputation, loss of status, whatever. There's that, which is fueling something much more pernicious, as you say.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's all these opportunistic people who figured out that, hey, this ideology is a great way to make money,
yes,
to become popular, to somebody who went from being a nobody, like a mediocre surgeon, is now top of their field, flying around the world, going to conferences, lecturing on this cutting-edge stuff, like Brave New World kind of self-promotion. So I think you have like a whole mix of stuff, and it just turns into this perfect storm. And it is women.
Yeah.
And the amazing thing to me to see is that it is women really primarily at the grassroots who are fighting this. It's women like yourself who you're a mum of 4, you saw something going on and you were like, hey, wait a minute, that's not on. That's not, I'm not going to let that happen. It's discouraging for me as someone 20 years younger to see that I'm pretty much like, other than conservatives making ideological arguments, I do feel kind of alone in a sense in fighting this. So I'm like, why are so few people willing to stand up for women and children in this way? It's pretty disappointing.
I just don't believe people. I don't believe some of our female politicians who say things like trans women are women. I don't believe them. I don't believe them for a second. I don't believe that if they organised a professional babysitting service and the person that turned up was 6'2" with stubble in a dress called Janet, clearly a man, I don't believe that they would feel as safe and secure as if Janet was a 56-year-old woman. It's a lie. And when it comes to young women, it's also women who are the modesty police in Iran, who are going along and, getting women into trouble for taking off their hijab. It's also women in North Africa who compel 7-year-old girls to have female genital mutilation. There's something really weird. Like, it's a man that will wreck his family by transitioning himself, a father, but it's a woman more often who will, by virtue of transitioning her own child, become like a hero in her own life. But, and I would have said 2 years ago, well, these women must have nothing going on, but sometimes they're quite successful. Maybe it's plugging the gap of not spending enough time with your actual child. And so you give them, as opposed to maybe giving them screen time and material things, you allow them to mutilate their bodies through medicine. It doesn't make any sense.
I think it's fair to say, without being really self-pitying, without getting the violins out, that it's actually quite difficult in this current climate to do what you do. It's quite difficult to say that's a table, to say a woman is an adult human female and that's it. Do you have like certain role models in your life, female role models that gave you the inspiration to kind of take a stand and say what you think?
Not very many women, I don't think. So I used to watch loads of lectures by Christopher Hitchens and Peter Hitchens and their sort of debate, and Ricky Gervais and some of the atheists who I don't necessarily have such a huge affection for as I used to. But just the way that Hitchens would just, in a room full of people that he knew would disagree, would say something because he thought that was the truth. And I think I like Douglas Murray. I was so excited that my name was in his book. But I don't know if I do find it hard. I mean, I do get some horrific abuse. The worst sort of things I've had done to me that affected me at all was the friendly fire. When women from my own side have said the most horrible things about me and defamatory things. The rest of it, I just think, as long as if somebody's talking about me, then somebody else is going to ask what it is that I think. And therefore they get into the argument. And my work, I think, is all about raising the awareness of what the arguments are. I don't necessarily need people to agree with me. I mean, I think they normally will because what I'm saying is true. But it's constantly about saying things because they need to be said. They need to be in the ether to stop them having this horrible, weighty fear. And so I don't find it hard because I can't not say anything. I can't not talk about this. I can't not talk about the fact that safeguarding is being obliterated in the United Kingdom, that we're blurring the boundaries between adults and children when it comes to sort of sex and what we talk about with children. in primary schools in the UK, and I'm pretty sure that's the same. There's a lady called America's Mom, and she talks about Colorado and what's going on in schools in Colorado. And it's the same stuff. You know, I don't think a teacher needs to use the word masturbation in front of a 9-year-old in a school situation. I think that humans have probably found themselves quite readily throughout human history without somebody in a school setting telling them what it is. And that goes for huge amounts to do with sexuality. We are not sexual beings until at least we are at or through puberty. So I don't want anybody to be talking about any sort of sex with children. Yeah. So I can't not say it. So that's why I think I don't find it hard. I don't mind being disliked. I have a really loving family. I adore my husband and my children. And if tomorrow the whole world turns its back on me, then I've got them and I'll just return to my former life.
I think it's funny as well because like so many people don't say something because they're scared of backlash that primarily happens actually on like social media.
Yeah.
And occasionally I'll write something. I'm not important or well known enough for people to really particularly care, but occasionally I'll write something where it'll be shared and critically by activist types, who most of which I can't actually see because they've all blocked me, but which works well. But there is that little feeling of like, oh, this is really unpleasant. And then I remember, this actually isn't real life. Like, this isn't the real world. These people don't know me. And when I was growing up in Glasgow, we were told sticks and stones might break your bones, but words can't really hurt you. My dad always likes to add that, well, sticks and stones do actually break your bones, though, so do be careful.
Wise man.
Which is true. But I think that it's that kind of sense that, look, we're not fighting ISIS, okay? We're fighting a very horrible ideology, and there is real consequences for a lot of people who might lose their job, might lose their friends. But we live in, you live in one of the freest countries on earth. I live in one of the freest countries on earth. I think that there's a very strong moral obligation to say what you think. And actually, I think it was Charles Krauthammer who said, you're betraying your entire life if you don't say what you think as precisely and immediately as you can. Mm. And I think that's exactly right. It is funny that most of our role models are men. I wonder if that's partly because men are better at being assertive and partly because we have internalized misogyny.
Well, I wonder whether women have always had to, and I use had to, and I don't know if I mean had to, but they always have been more into groups. Maybe it's something in our, evolution that women make social groups better than men. Maybe
which
we're
means
the
not
glue.
Upsetting the social norm, which means fitting in and being agreeable. Women are much more agreeable, and I would say that neither of us are particularly agreeable.
But there's no point agreeing with someone if actually it's a complete lie. Like, I don't even get it. I couldn't. Somebody was saying to me, I'd like you to do this podcasty thing. And the first thing I said was, well, I can only speak if it's my genuine opinion. I can't give somebody else's view for a number of reasons. One, that I just won't be consistent and I won't remember. But if I'm not truthful, I won't be able to say anything because I'll just look like a lunatic. But also with sort of speaking the truth constantly, I'm also okay with changing my mind. I'm okay with being wrong. I'm okay with not being completely consistent because I've got new information and therefore what I thought last week is not the same as I think this week. I don't think that makes me a flawed human.
No, but it also makes you a non-ideological human. And I think that the problem, the excesses of feminism are in an ironic way, and that's partly why feminism is sold out on so many things, including this issue, are the same as the excesses of like the gender stuff, which is that it puts ideology before everything else, including common sense, including settled science, and just like basic things that society needs in order to be a safe and actually liberal place. Anyway, I think we've probably spoken for enough. So let's just end on like a hopeful note, if we can. Do you see this getting better? And if so, when?
I think it's coming to sort of a critical mass. I think it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. But I think the a lot worse will mean more people are impacted. In the UK, we've got quite a lot of cases going to the High Court with judicial reviews. So the free speech angle, the police, 87,000 hate incidents are recorded. They're not even crimes. We've got Maya Forstater. Her case will probably go to appeal, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Harry Miller's case, that's the police judicial review.
Macarith as well, I think, the doctor.
Yes.
But I really like that J.K. Rowling is kind of, I think J.K. Rowling defended a woman who'd lost, Maya Forstater, who'd lost her job for saying that sex is real. On Twitter, suffered a ton of abuse from it on Twitter, has so far withstood the pressure.
Fingers crossed.
And I think that is a signal that things are changing. Like if J.K. Rowling, the author of Harry Potter, who's famously liberal, who hates Trump, can say this and survive it, then why not other people?
Yeah, I think if a multi-millionaire can have an opinion online, I think we're really getting somewhere. I agree with you.
What I mean,
joking.
though, is that is helpful to other people.
Absolutely, of course it is.
And we need more J.K. Rowlings.
Just need more people just to say the truth. That's all that needs to happen. People need to. I mean, you don't even need to say trans women aren't women. You don't need to admit that they're men. You don't even need to talk about the trans lobby groups. You don't need to do any of that. You need to maybe say, could we be a little bit more cautious and wait for some evidence before we mutilate kids' bodies? Could we maybe ensure that women who say that biology is real don't lose their jobs? I mean, those are positions I would have thought most people could voice.
Yeah. Radical. Okay. Well, thanks very much for coming in. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
And I'll see you at the pub later.
Yay!